While we're still talking, as long as we're talking about such things as, what was the big four about being individually creative as opposed to being a collective expert, and how, in fact, if you're going to be a collective expert, you must be able to ignore the obvious, and after that, to be in a position at the ordinary level of ignoring the obvious, you must be able then to deal quite properly in secondary, derivative, ancillary maps and directions. Well, since we're talking about this, then the rhetorical question, and even beyond that, is, are we big girls and boys enough to face this? Why don't we just go ahead and ask? Just what are ancillary maps anyway? Well, hey, if you're going to do that, what is the secondary world? Okay. Just so that you don't waste having your mud tires on, let's take it in reverse order. That is, what is the secondary world, since now we've talked about it so long, that kind of map and everyone knows. Yeah, know this. How about this? The secondary world, since Kyroots brought up some of it already tonight. A new way to look at the secondary world. The secondary world is the primary with words superimposed on it. Next problem. Of course, in the ordinary world, you don't have to ask for the next problem, if you ever notice that. It is only at very, very parochial schools, in fact, those for people of even more limited intelligence than some of us, it's only in those kind of places does someone actually sit at a desk, and once one problem goes, to say, send in the next one. In fact, if it operates in a strange way to get serious off the subject. Surprise! Well, it actually operates, there's a kind of, don't they say in those kind of science fiction movies, there's some kind of time warp, because it actually happens, but it slows down with the human intelligence so that those who want to say, well, one down, send in the next problem out there. You know, the next problem's already there. But it would be confusing, so it would interfere with time, and so it's as though everyone has to say, well, okay. And it does not even necessarily have to be as quickly in a sequence as I am doing now. It's sometimes subsequent to the person feeling as though, well, one of the problems has been taken out of my driveway. The guy either fixed it, it rotted away, somebody towed it away, he went in the house for a cold biscuit and came back, and the problem was gone. That's the way it is. And so then it's as though people say, well, okay, send in the next problem. Now, if it were as I'm telling you, that you don't have to do that, that the next problem's there, you understand, it would be kind of like, I guess, to not just science fiction, but actually get into technical physics. I guess it would be that like time would get all mooshed together. And people would get even more confused than some people say they are already. So, the secondary world is the primary world with words superimposed on it. If you recall, there was a Kyroots tonight, when I said he'd already brought it up, the one that said that once man could run on one map, and the one map is just numerical, it doesn't matter which one, but once a map seems to be operational and sufficient for man to operate, once that is done, then an overlay is required. You all know what an overlay that you've got. They used to have them in atlases and little books back in high school of the human anatomy. Of course, some years back, they used to leave out the good parts. But times were simpler. When people always say times were simpler, what they mean is times were dumber. Well, no matter how you look at it, it's got nothing to do with the so-called change in morality. You just got to look at it as being dumb that they showed pictures of people in a book that says all you should know as a young child about physiology and the human anatomy, and you look there and it's a man or a woman. Since I was some of us were men, we looked at the women first. And you looked and there were parts, well, anatomically speaking, they're known as the good parts. And you would look and the good parts weren't there. And you thought, wait a minute, these people are teaching me? After that, some children began to have some doubts about history and geography. You know, at any rate, you all know what an overlay was where I was. It was like they would have pictures, say, of geography, and they would show Europe post-World War I, and then it'd be here, on your left-hand side, and then there would be a clear plastic that would have different boundaries drawn and showing what happened after the Great Treaty of Westphalia, and you'd fold it over, and it would say something like Europe circa 1919 through 1939. So that you could look and you could compare. You all know what that is. It's like a plastic overlay is what they called it. That is truly, from another sort of expanded view, what the secondary, the intellectual world of man is. It is simply the primary with an overlay on it. But it's always so. And there's not just one overlay. There's not been just one production of a secondary world. It continues to go, which is what gives most ordinary people the extreme red ass. That everybody grows up and they get to be 21 and they just barely get to the point that they can stand life. They've gotten old enough and their hormones begin to wear down and they're married and they're putting on weight, and so, at least speaking from a male view, you women can do your own version, and it's like, well, here I am married and I'm working 2 jobs and I sure would like to get out and find some kind of strange women on the side, but I don't even have the money, I'm too tired, and plus for some reason I'm not as horny as I used to be. And so they take that as a kind of progress, or what do they call it in life? Being mature, growing up, that's it. I always write that down, I always forget that. There is a continual process individually and then on larger scales, which you can do it yourself, but there is a continual acceptance of a map. When you grow up and you become part of the ordinary collective of your generation, of your environs, to you have accepted the map. You're an adult, you've kind of given up, and it's whatever age you are, it's like, well, I can coast downhill. From here to the grave, I don't really have to do that much more anymore. Oh, I know people don't want to talk like that. That's what your hormones, that is the operational reality of your hormones is, well, I can lay down and do nothing. I can find that guy that was laying down in the cardboard box and join him. I can lay there and I can still coast. 50 or 60 or 70 years. All right, that would be on an individual level. That would be meeting the schematic of that one Kyroot, that man can run by one map, an overlay is required. All right. So an ordinary person gets to the point that they have become them, or another Kyroot, that once you become you, the joke's on you. Of course, the king said later on tonight that surely that couldn't be true, or else somebody would have told me. Once a map, now you understand what I'm saying, once a map is accepted, once a map of whatever it is, it doesn't matter, once one is accepted, and that a man, a group of men, an era, any segment of reality is then running by that map, then an overlay is required. That is, in essence, what I'm trying to sketch in a different way of saying that man's intellectual primary world is a verbal, a wordy overlay of the primary. Now, in a real operational sense, something we'd sort of touched on last time, that maybe we can tie it back in with the help of Wild Bill, you know who, is that man, if it were not for the secondary world, if we were dealing only with the primary world and we could still have things as they are and still a little different, play that game, that if man was in some ways now trying to live just by the primary world, if man was still just part of the kind of animalistic, physical primary world as on this planet, if it was the primary world vis-a-vis man standing alone, things would be too tight, too inflexible for any expansion. which is another way. It's not the only way, but this is one way to describe why. Well, you people got to be good enough for me to keep apologizing. Caveating. I don't want to think about it. You could say that other creatures are not evolving. No. Minks, beavers, accountants are not. Other lower creatures, physical creatures, are not evolving. Not attorneys, priests. Other creatures are not evolving for one reason: they can't talk. That's it. That they cannot superimpose words on their primary. That is, that they are too tight and inflexible. Of course. Of course. From another quite valid view, we can say, well, it's a darn good thing. Well, we've already said it. We said it a couple of nights ago, and by God, we'll say it again with your support. It's a darn good thing. Because what if things were loose and flexible? Now you're faced with that. And a beaver thought, well, every day, wood. Maybe, why don't I look for some truffles? I'm in the neighborhood anyway. Or perhaps he's in a more urban area and he sees a burger doodle open up and he thinks, I'll go over there and I'll start hanging around. Maybe somebody will toss me a chili dog. There is no room for flexibility in the primary world. And of course, that kind of primary world still exists in all of us, in man, that down at the primary level, using it as verbally as a distinguishable, discrete part of the organism, of the system of man, then you do know down at the primary level, if you're just relatively sane. There is really no flexibility down there, which is not true of man, is what makes man man. But we've been, at any rate, if you were just relatively sane, there is not really that kind of flexibility. Now, for instance, you should not be taking in alcohol. You should not be smoking. You should not be eating too much. You should probably not be eating anchovies. Or just whatever the common, I'm not picking out. It's just you understand you should not be committing slow suicide. It doesn't matter with ordinary people. But to take it strictly the way I'm saying at the primary level, if things were operating at optimum efficiency from a human view, not my view, but just from the collective human view, then people would not be doing anything that would be detrimental, even possibly detrimental nowadays, since health is such a big hobby, to their health, that you would be keeping up. 6 months ago, I guess you've been eating 4 pails of bran every day. And then for a while, I think they said, nope, we made a mistake, and so you wouldn't be eating bran. And that was get cod liver oil. I'm not just making fun of it. You understand from a strict, ordinary collective view, the primary world, even in man, has no room for tolerance. That if you are playing outside the rules of good health, then you are not really looking after yourself, and you have really gone outside the boundaries of reasonable, sane pursuit of a healthy life. Now, to expand the organism of man, since we are not simply physical beings, or we would be fighting with the beavers over the chili dogs and the garbage, rather than being able to go in and buy our own, having a credit card. Since we are not, then you've got to realize that anywhere in the human nervous system, to move up beyond the hypostolic area, somewhere into the cerebral cortex, then here, if the primary world, again playing, everything still being the same and yet being different. If we could then push man into being a thinking creature, and in some way being a thinking creature was still absolutely tied to the primary world, then the thoughts you would be dealing with the same kind of lack of tolerance, the same kind of inflexibility that when the primary world is operating at maximum efficiency, there is no room, there's no question of freedom. Hippos do not sit around, ponder what would it be to be free. Elephants do not stand around amongst themselves and say, Herb, do we actually have freedom of will, or is it just a big illusion? They don't. And there's nothing wrong with that, because at that level, if they did, it would not be a boon. It would be a bust. But since we are not that, and now still considering it within one single human nervous system, when you get into the area now that is somewhere beyond what would be the primary world in its manifestation in your nervous system, then there must be a kind of looseness. And this looseness comes about through the overlay. This looseness, this flexibility is provided by man now taking, although albeit we're using my maps and descriptions for the time being, which are ad hoc and disposable and unsafe for children under the age of. When you get to this level, there has to be a kind of flexibility, there has to be a kind of looseness, and it comes about through having words being superimposed on the primary. That is what creates the looseness. From that springeth the ancillary maps. That although the man said in the concluding Kyroot tonight, when this man, if you recall, was asked if he would offer up, give an explanation about what he was about to do, what he was preparing to do, and the man said, "It's about all I can do to do what I do." Not having to talk about it, not having to describe it. As any good Kyroots, if there be, somebody said the only good one. It could go either way. It's according to whether you're ordinary or somebody else. Because it could go ordinary and you could take it as being some kind of, again, maybe a fairly interesting, smart-ass social comment. Look at it another way. It is a short, two-line representation of life growing, operating, thriving. Just kind of put in a curious verbal context. Because that is what creates the looseness, that is what makes man, from one quite valid view, I suggest, what makes man singular in this reality is that he can superimpose words and find it, I'm not saying this, I'm not making the criticism, but man himself says he finds it under many, many circumstances extremely annoying. That is, that I'm in line waiting to die, and by God, I don't like it. Here we go again. All right, wait here and I'll call life and let him add this one to the thing. For a man to expand, for a man to be man under the atmospheric intellectual conditions of this reality, you have got to have a kind of real freedom. It's not theoretical, but it's a kind of freedom, or if you prefer, is a kind of looseness that is provided by, that is available in a verbal, secondary, derivative reality. And that is what man's talking part of the nervous system is. That to call, as I've been doing, the directions, the ideals, the ideas of man's secondary world, to call them derivative, would be very susceptible under ordinary conditions to be taken as a pejorative comment. As per one of the Kyroots tonight, you could have taken that way, if you recall, that a man said that any artist whose work is shoddy, cheap, and derivative should specialize in self-portraits. Which I'm not even going, I don't even want to think about that. But at any rate, you know, most often, surely I haven't done a survey, okay. The word derivative is used in a negative sense. And of course you could say that, even with my description, if you're ordinary, about man's intellectual world, man's secondary world. You could say, well, it's derivative, and you could look down your nose at it. But you would in turn be the kind of person who would look up your nose at suicide. Think about that. Derivative is not in any way inferior. It is the fact, if you recall another Kyroot tonight, it was sort of based upon one from night before last, that said no matter how exotic the numerous flowers in the intellectual garden may be, they all grow from the native soil. And another way it was mentioned tonight, that flowers would have in the intellectual garden no smell of their own were it not for the aroma of the soil. So to talk about an overlay of the secondary world on man's primary world, to talk about that which the mind thinks and plans and plots, to call it derivative is not an insult in any way. And it is not to put thinking in a secondary position, which it is certainly not. But it is derivative in the sense that no matter what the mind does, it's got no aroma other than that which the primary world gave it. All the ideas that man in some way is intellectually, through the folly of his mind and his greeds, by such things as popular now circa 1990s, destroying the planet, killing the ozone, killing the rainforest, etc. That man's mind in some way can run wild, that we have opened up. Do we have anybody here, any experts who have not said, jumpstart the economy this week? If so, let's use open the Pandora's box and can't get the jumper cables back in. This kind of common belief, it's part of being an unfinished product and part of the herd beginning to smell the scent just over the horizon of barbed wire. But the belief that in some way man's mind, your forefathers of course thought was his spirit and his heart and evil, that in some way man's mind and all of its unsavory characteristics, greed, avarice, wanting to be an attorney or an undertaker, that it's run amok and it's going to destroy us all. I feel like at times that some of us are unduly, some of you, I'm not going to accept, are unduly harsh on the dumb, stupid, and ordinary of life, and I think they should be given their due. Because think of what it takes for someone to say that. Let's all just take a moment. And by God, it's not limited to just, take either end you want to start with, it's not just limited to backhole operators nor college professors. But think what it takes for someone to say, which they're doing it daily, especially experts, that in some way man's mind, his uniqueness, that which has put him in the position where he is, which they put in this part, that man being able to reach such a high level of technological evolution that he is now in the position to destroy himself. They used to do it about the atomic bomb, and that seems like it's a little more kind of new age-ish that, well, maybe us in the USSR are not going to destroy each other through nuclear weapons, but we're going to now, through our own technology, through our own progress, we're going to kill ourselves by polluting the environment to such a degree that there's going to be these great holes opened up over the Antarctica. Is happening. Antarctica is going to go, wow! But that we're going to destroy ourselves. Do you understand all of this? And they can prove it. They got statistics, they got charts. And again, they're saying man's mind has been turned loose, and that son of a bitch has turned into a madman. It's just run amok. What are we going to do about it? All right, back to what I said. Just a couple of seconds. Let's think and just pay homage. At least be even slightly, don't have to make rude noises, be kind of amazed at what it takes for a man, an educated, a reasonable, intelligent, a thinking human being to say that. Now just think about it a second. Kind of makes you pause and be quiet when somebody says pause and be quiet, doesn't it? I'm sure that we would all agree that that is an expeditious place. Nobody liked the one about the prince that thought if the gods didn't want me to intellectually be ostentatious. Why would they have ever given you a tatious anyway? But I'm sure this is an auspicious place for everyone to look at the word chow and say, how in the hell do you pronounce that? Au revoir.